Hey guys, it's Dan here. In this week's video we will talk about mergers and acquisitions, the famous M&A. In this week's video you will learn how does it work, is there a good timing or what is the best timing to do mergers and acquisitions, and is it worth it? Is it a success? Is it a failure? How does it work? Are there some factors you have to consider? Let's find out together and let's get started, guys. First of all, let's find out what is M&A. Well, as I just mentioned, M&A stands for mergers and acquisitions and is always called together, but actually there are two different things happening here. On the one hand side you have mergers, on the other side you have acquisitions, and you will see by this example they are similar but not exactly the same. So let's start with the mergers. In a merger you have a company A and a company B. Both decide to merge and they become a new legal entity, which is gonna be C in this example. So you can, A disappears, B disappears, and it's melting down into C. That's the merger. This is also called the merger of equals, because usually A and B are from the similar sector and the similar size, so pretty big usually. To give you an example, back in 1998, like a century ago, Daimler Chrysler merged, which became one of the biggest disasters ever in M&A. We will talk about it later. And usually in this kind of merger situation, it's more like you have the choice between a cash deal or an equity deal. In this case, it's an equity deal, which means that company A and company B are trading shares. There is no cash involved, it's just shares involved in both sides. On the other side, acquisitions. You have a company A which is buying the target company B in this case, so everything becomes A. There is no new entity C because A buys B. So it's more like a David versus Goliath scenario. And to give you a recent example, 2 years ago, Apple bought Beats by Dre, the headset company, headphones company, and in this case it can be either a cash or an equity deal. Meaning either they are trading shares or they are giving them cash. That's how it is. The goal of both here in this case, and that's why, as I just mentioned, they are not the same but they are similar, because the goals are pretty much the same. Because the goal in this case, in both cases, is to become more competitive, meaning acquiring more and more market share. Become more efficient through synergies, in other terms saving costs for example, and becoming more profitable, because obviously if you are gaining market shares you have more revenues, and if you are more efficient, meaning you are reducing costs, so you are making more profits. So then this is basically how M&A works. Okay guys, now let's talk about the timing and why companies acquire new companies or why they merge. I left you with my two examples here. In the merger category we had the Daimler Chrysler merger, which became, well, Daimler Chrysler in the new entity. And the reason why they have done it, and also the timing why they have done it, is during that time, end of the 90s, there was slow growth in the car sector, and the word you often hear when there is a slow growth is that the sector or an industry is consolidating. So there was consolidation here. So what is happening here? Well, consolidation means that you have many players in one industry and they become less by either buying each other or by merging. This is what happened here. And to also give you background information here, Daimler's goal was to access the US market by merging with Chrysler, who they were mainly doing pickups and SUVs. And Chrysler's goal was to access the European luxury market, especially luxury sedans with Daimler. On the other side, acquisition, same game more or less. If we take the example of Apple, who bought Beats by Dre 2 years ago. Well, what was the goal and what was the timing for Apple? Well, they found out that there is a new market opening up and that they are not part of it. So their goal here for Apple was to access a new market without developing their own product. They could have developed their own Apple headsets easily probably, but the thing is they wanted to benefit from the brand recognition and of the great work from Beats by Dre, and that's why actually the idea for Apple to acquire Beats by Dre was to get premium headset market access. For Beats by Dre, which was obviously here the very small player in the game, the goal was to cash out. Dr. Dre and the investors, they wanted to cash out obviously after the fast growth at the beginning. And they wanted to grow more because obviously if you become part of Apple's ecosystem, well, you have a lot of space to grow. What you have to keep in mind when it comes to timing, in my opinion, is the best timing for mergers and acquisitions is always within a crisis or just right after it, because that's within a crisis. Think about 2008, for example, with the financial crisis and the banks. A lot of banks have merged, well, to stay alive and to become stronger for after the crisis. And in my opinion, you will see exactly the same happening right now and next year with the airlines. I mean, you saw it with the airlines the last couple of years already, because there are so many unprofitable airlines that they have to merge and they will be acquiring one each other. So yeah, keep watching the airlines, because I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of mergers acquisition going on there. Yeah, and of course it's pretty interesting to buy another company or to merge with another company within a crisis, because of course the share prices are pretty low, because of course in a crisis, let's think about the airlines, the stocks are very low, so you can easily buy another airline if you have the cash. Now that you know what M&A is and what is the perfect timing to do a merger or an acquisition, let's ask the big question: is it worth it? Well, for companies, actually not really, because more than 50% of M&A deals fail, and I will talk about it right now why. But one important thing is you have to know is M&A plays such a big role because it's very interesting for investment banks. Think about it, investment banks are kind of the experts in mergers and acquisitions. And that's why they ask so many fees, and so that's why investment banks are always winning in big M&A deals, and that's why they are always looking for it. So now, why do companies usually fail, more than half of them, when they do mergers and acquisitions? Well, let's look at the 4 reasons. First reason: wrong expectations. As I mentioned before, usually it's called an equal merger, which means that both companies which are about to merge are roughly the same size, same sector, and then the big question is, when it's an equal merger, let's say Daimler Chrysler, who's gonna make it at the end? Who's gonna make the big decisions? Who's gonna be appointed as a CEO and these kind of things? And usually at the beginning the expectations are wrong, because if you don't have one which dominates the other one, it's kind of a bad mix of both, and usually it doesn't work. So that's the first big reason. Second reason, and that's one of the huge reasons why the Daimler-Chrysler merger failed miserably: different cultures, different history, and different style of management. Think about it. Daimler, the typical old school German company; Chrysler, the typical American old school company. Different history, different management styles, and all that led to, well, a lack of integration between both of them. You know, usually work, there was no real integration, and that's why they split up not even 10 years after, with huge losses. Then, of course, there is also what is called poor due diligence before the M&A process. So what is a due diligence? When there is a merger or an acquisition, usually you have some consultants, or usually the investment bank who's gonna do the deal. They will do what is called a due diligence. Due diligence is everything they say true about their financials. What about the legal risks? Maybe environmental risks, and all these kind of risk factors and chances and opportunities have to be considered. And when it's done correctly, you have a good due diligence, and that's why you pay a lot of money for it usually, because you want to avoid all kind of big risks at the beginning. But usually, especially in the case of Daimler Chrysler, for example, it was poorly made, this due diligence, and it led to an overvaluation of both Daimler and Chrysler, and that's why it failed actually. The last reason, which is also important, is poor post-merger integration. Here, and I've witnessed it myself when I was working for a company which just merged with another one. Actually, it's pretty simple. Think about it. It's like going shopping. It's pretty simple to buy a company. Everybody can do it. If you have the cash, you can buy another company. What is very difficult, first of all, the valuation should be correct, don't overpay, that's the first thing. But even more importantly and more challenging is how do you integrate this company into the new structure? And usually this is where it fails, you know, even if you have a good culture, a good history, good management aligned, sometimes it fails just during the integration process because it's pretty complicated. So now let's look at some examples of succeeding M&A operations and why they have been successful. Okay, a bit less than half of all the M&A deals become success stories. So let's look at a few success stories and take a look at it and see what they have in common. Well, first of all, matching company cultures. And here we have a great example from 2005, which was Google, who bought Android at that time. Google was not that old at that time in 2005, pretty small company for that time still. And Android was absolutely unknown. They were just making some mobile operations. And actually, well, they bought them for 50 million. And as you can see here, well, it became a great collaboration, obviously, because there was some matching company cultures here, both like with the startup flair, both American companies and these kind of things. Second point for success, fulfilled expectations. Here we have an example, for example, Bank of America with Merrill Lynch. And here the idea was Merrill Lynch was struggling in 2008, almost bankrupt. And Bank of America needed to strengthen their investment banking, so they bought this investment bank, Merrill Lynch, and it worked out pretty fine for them because they got what they paid for, and the synergies which were planned at the beginning, well, they happened over the few years. And the idea, why are we talking about fulfilled expectations here? Because here, even here it was clear from the start that Bank of America would buy Merrill Lynch, and they were here the strong partner, and they would dominate here in this alliance. Next point, good due diligence. As I mentioned before, obviously if you make a poor due diligence, you will probably have a misvaluation or an overvaluation. In this case, if you do it correctly, which should be the case if you pay these kind of money usually, well, you should have a correct valuation, which is kind of the basics for the future. And then one of the most important points, you need to plan and execute your post M&A integration. So what do I mean by that? It's easy to buy or to merge. That's the easy stuff. But then the question is, how do you integrate? How are these two companies melting together? Well, there are a few points here. Obviously, you need a plan, and then you need to execute this plan. And actually, there are a few steps. First of all, you need dedicated internal resources, and I've seen that myself when I was part of such a thing. When you only rely on consultants to do the integration, it's gonna fail because it needs to come from the inside. So you need internal guys, internal resources who, well, put their time and efforts into integration, because that's really a key part. Then second of all, of course, you need time and money to integrate, obviously. It always makes me laugh when a CEO at the end of the year tells you, well, the integration is done. Well, technically it's done. If you want, legally it's done. But there is so much stuff going on, so much time to merge IT systems and all these kind of things, that you need a lot of time and money. Then, of course, you need to keep your key employees. If your key employees, especially from the company you just bought, if they are all leaving, for example, like the great software developers or these kind of personnel, well, then you have a problem, because you probably paid too much, or you were not able to keep these guys. That's very important. Then, of course, since I mentioned before, the integration process takes a lot of time and money. And what happens sometimes is that the two new businesses, well, they lose focus. They lose focus on their products, on their services, and that's why it's very important to keep focus on your key products and services. And the last important point, and this was what I was saying here with the fulfilled expectations. In the expectations, there is always some kind of synergy expectation. Let's say we want to save 5 billion due to this merger or something like that, cost cutting. Well, if it's what is very important to understand is let's say if you are saying, oh, well, we're gonna save 5 billion and you only save 3, well, you have a kind of a problem here. So synergies have to be aligned with expectations, and also they have to be much higher than obviously the M&A fees, because let's say if you save 1 billion through through the synergies, and if you are paying 1 billion to an investment bank, it's like a zero-sum game. So that's what you would like to avoid. So synergies here very important. So now that you know more or less everything about M&A, it's a very deep subject, obviously. I wanted to tell you that I post once a week, every Sunday. So if you like these kind of topics, corporate finance, market finance, you know where to find me. Don't forget to like that video. If you like that content, it takes me about 7 hours to do. So that will be a great gesture. And don't forget to subscribe if you like that stuff. Thanks. Have a great week. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.